The wind cut through the mountain pass like a knife looking for bone. Mara Ellington sat on the back of a supply wagon, her son Tommy pressed against her side, and watched the frontier town of Coldwater Ridge emerge from the pine trees like a bad promise. The settlement clung to the mountainside the way moss clings to rock, stubborn, gray, and barely alive. Wooden buildings leaned into the slope. Smoke rose from crooked chimneys. The whole place looked like it might slide into the valley below if someone sneezed too hard. She pulled her coat tighter. It didn't help. Nothing helped anymore. "Mama?" Tommy's voice was small. He was 7, and he'd learned in the past year not to ask too many questions. But sometimes they still slipped out. "Is this where we're staying?" Mara looked down at him. His face was dirty. His coat was too thin. His eyes held the kind of wariness that no child should carry. "For now," she said. The wagon driver, a man named Polk, who'd charged her nearly everything she had left for the ride up from the valley, glanced back at them. His expression was the same one she'd been seeing for months, that mixture of pity and disgust people wore when they looked at her. Like she was roadkill they had to step around. "You got people here?" Polk asked. "No? Work lined up? I'll find something," he snorted. "Good luck with that." The wagon rolled into town just after noon. The main street was a rutted dirt track lined with buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together by men who didn't plan on staying long. A general store. A saloon. A boarding house with a faded sign that promised clean rooms, reasonable rates. A few people moved along the wooden sidewalks, their faces hard and closed. Mountain people. The kind who'd survived winters that killed the weak and summers that burned away the foolish. They looked at the wagon. Then they looked at Mara. She felt their eyes like physical weight. Polk pulled the wagon to a stop outside the boarding house. "This is as far as I go." Mara climbed down, then lifted Tommy after her. Their belongings fit in 2 canvas bags and a battered trunk. Everything they owned in the world. Everything they had left after the bank took the house, after the funeral costs, after the long, humiliating slide from respectable widow to charity case to this. Polk didn't help with the trunk. He just sat on the wagon seat and watched her struggle. She got it down herself. Always did. "Appreciate the ride," she said. He grunted and drove off without another word. Tommy stood close to her, his hand gripping her skirt. Mara looked at the boarding house. The windows were grimy, the porch sagged. But it was shelter, and shelter was something. She picked up the trunk, heavier than it should be, but she'd learned to carry heavy things, and walked toward the door to him. The woman behind the desk inside looked like she'd been carved from the same gray stone as the mountains. 60, maybe older. Iron hair pulled back so tight it must have hurt. Eyes that measured and judged in the space of a heartbeat. "Help you?" Her voice matched her face. "Need a room," Mara said. "2 beds if you have it, 1 if you don't." The woman's gaze traveled from Mara's worn boots to her faded dress to her face, then down to Tommy, back to Mara. "How long?" "Week to start. Maybe more if I find work." "Payment up front." Mara reached into her coat pocket and counted out coins. The woman watched every movement like Mara might pull a knife instead of currency. "That's for 3 nights, the woman said when Mara finished. "Not a week. Your sign says reasonable rates. That is reasonable. For here." Mara looked at the coins in her hand. 3 nights. Then what? She pushed the money across the desk. "Fine." The woman took it and handed over a key. "Upstairs, 2nd door on the right. No cooking in the rooms, no loud noise, no visitors after dark." Her eyes flicked to Tommy again. "Keep the boy quiet." Mara took the key. He's always quiet. The room was exactly what she'd expected. 2 narrow beds with thin mattresses, a washstand with a chipped basin. 1 small window that looked out at the alley behind the building. The wallpaper was peeling, the floorboards creaked, but it was clean enough, and it had a door that locked. Tommy sat on one of the beds and looked around. "It's okay, Mama," he said. She wanted to cry. Instead, she smiled. "It's better than okay. We've got a roof and a bed and we're safe. That's more than a lot of people have." He nodded like he believed her. She unpacked their things, what few things there were, and then sat down beside him. Her back ached, her feet hurt, her head throbbed with the constant grinding worry that had become her only reliable companion. "I'm going to go look for work," she said. "You stay here. Read your book. I'll bring back something for supper." I can come with you. No. She softened it with a hand on his shoulder. I need you to rest. You've been strong for me, Tommy. So strong, but you need to rest now. He didn't argue. He was too tired to argue. She locked him in the room and went back downstairs. The gray-haired woman was still at the desk. Any ranches around here hiring? Mara asked. The woman looked up from her ledger. You worked ranches before? I can cook, clean, handle livestock if needed. I'm not afraid of hard work. A lot of people aren't afraid of hard work. Doesn't mean they can do it. Mara kept her voice steady. I can do it. The woman studied her for a long moment. Then she shrugged. Try the mercantile. Harlan keeps track of who's hiring, if anyone is. The mercantile was across the street. The man behind the counter, Harlan, presumably, was lean and weathered like jerky left too long in the sun. He looked at Mara the same way everyone else had, like she was something that didn't quite belong. I'm looking for work, she said. Cooking, cleaning, general labor. The woman at the boarding house said you might know who's hiring. Harlan scratched his jaw. Not many folks hiring this time of year. Winter's coming. Most operations are cutting back, not expanding. I don't need much, just enough to keep a room and feed my son. You worked before? I ran my own household for 10 years. Did all the cooking, cleaning, preserving, helped with the animals. I know how to work. That's town work. Ranch work's different. I'm a fast learner. He didn't look convinced. There's a few outfits up in the high country. Calder Ranch is the biggest. They run cattle and timber. Tough operation. Rhett Calder doesn't suffer fools. I'm not a fool. Didn't say you were, but he's particular about who he brings on. Lost his last cook a month ago. Haven't heard if he's replaced him yet. How do I find him? Harlan pulled out a scrap of paper and drew a rough map. Follow the north trail out of town, about 8 miles up. Can't miss it once you get into the high meadow. Thank you. He handed her the map. You got a horse? No? 8 miles is a long walk. I've walked farther. She had. After the bank took everything, she'd walked with Tommy for 3 days straight to reach the coach station. Her feet had bled through her stockings by the second day. She'd wrapped them in cloth and kept walking. She could walk 8 miles, but not today. Today she needed to make sure Tommy had food, needed to plan, needed to think. She went to the small general store section of the mercantile and bought bread, cheese, and 2 apples with the last of her money. Then she went back to the room. Tommy was reading, or pretending to read. His book was a worn copy of adventure stories that had been his father's when he was young. I found something, Mara said. A ranch that might need a cook. I'll go tomorrow. They ate the bread and cheese sitting on the bed. Tommy made his portion last as long as he could. He'd learned not to ask for more. That night, Mara lay awake listening to him breathe in the other bed. The room was cold. The walls were thin enough that she could hear people moving in other rooms, footsteps on the stairs, voices from the saloon down the street. She thought about the coins she'd counted out, 3 nights, then nothing. She thought about the look on the boarding house woman's face, the look on Harlan's face, the look on every face she'd seen since arriving. She thought about the map in her pocket. 8 miles. She'd walked farther. The next morning, Mara left before dawn. She'd considered bringing Tommy, but the walk would be hard and she didn't know what she'd find at the end of it. Better to leave him safe and rested. She paid the boarding house woman to keep an eye on him. Overpaid, really, but she couldn't risk leaving him alone. And started walking. The trail north climbed steadily out of town. The air was thinner up here, sharp and clean. Pine trees pressed close on both sides. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded her of better days. She walked. The trail was rougher than she'd expected. Rocks and roots turned her ankles. The incline made her legs burn. But she kept moving. After 2 hours, she stopped to rest. Her back ached. Her feet throbbed. But she was maybe halfway there. She drank water from the canteen she'd brought and ate a piece of bread. Then she kept going. The high meadow opened up suddenly, like the mountain had taken a breath and held it. Grass stretched out in all directions, golden in the morning light. Cattle grazed in the distance. And beyond them, tucked against the tree line, stood a collection of buildings that could only be the ranch. Main house, barn, bunkhouse, storage sheds. Corrals and fences. Wood smoke rising from the chimney. It looked solid, permanent, like it had been there forever and would stay there forever. Mara walked toward it. As she got closer, she saw men working, one repairing a fence, another leading horses, a third chopping wood behind the barn. They all stopped when they noticed her. She kept walking. A man emerged from the barn, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of easy confidence that came from knowing exactly where he stood in the world. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, flannel shirt, leather vest. His hat was pushed back on his head. His face was hard and tanned, with lines around his eyes from squinting into too many sunrises. He watched her approach. Mara stopped a respectful distance away. "I'm looking for Rhett Calder." "You found him." His voice was rough, not unkind, but not friendly either, just neutral. "I heard you might need a cook." He looked at her, really looked. She felt herself being assessed the way a rancher might assess a horse at auction, measuring her worth, calculating her usefulness. "Where'd you hear that?" "Harlan at the mercantile in town." "Harlan talks too much." "Is it true?" Rhett crossed his arms. "Might be. What's your experience?" "I ran my own household for 10 years, cooked for my husband and helped with the farm. I know how to manage supplies, preserve food, handle large meals. I'm organized and I work hard. This isn't a household, it's a work camp. I've got 12 men here full-time, more during timber season. They work from before dawn to after dark. They expect hot food 3 times a day and they don't care if it's pretty. I'm not here to make pretty food, I'm here to make food that keeps men working." Something flickered in his expression, not quite a smile, more like recognition. "You walked here?" "Yes." "That's 8 miles." "I'm aware." He studied her for another moment. Then he nodded toward the main house. "Come on." She followed him across the yard. The other men watched. She could feel their eyes, could almost hear their thoughts. The house was simple but well built. Wooden floors, solid furniture, a stone fireplace. The kitchen was larger than she'd expected, clearly designed to feed a crew. There was a big iron stove, a long prep table, shelves stocked with dry goods. "This is where you'd work," Rhett said. "Breakfast at 5, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. You'd handle all the cooking, baking, and food prep. Keep the supplies organized. Let me know what needs ordering. The men can clean up after themselves, but the kitchen is your responsibility." Mara looked around. She could see herself here, could see how it would work. "What's the pay?" "Room and board plus $30 a month." It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing, and room and board meant she could save most of it. "I have a son," she said. "He's 7. Rhett's expression didn't change. "That a problem?" "I need to bring him with me. He won't be any trouble. He can help with small tasks, fetch water, gather eggs if you keep chickens. He's a good boy." "This is a working ranch, not a place for children." "He's been in harder places than this." Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Room and board covers both of you, but he stays out of the men's way. And if he gets hurt or causes problems, that's on you." "Understood." "When can you start?" "Tomorrow, if you need me." "I need you today." Mara blinked. "Today?" "Lost my cook a month ago. Been making do with whatever the men can throw together. It's getting ugly." He gestured toward the stove. "You make lunch today, you've got the job. You don't, you can walk back to town." It was a test. She knew that. She also knew she didn't have a choice. "What time is it now?" 10:30. "What are they like?" "Anything hot and filling. We've got beef, potatoes, beans, flour. Whatever you need is here or in the storehouse." Mara set down her bag. "Then I'd better get started." She didn't waste time. She moved through the kitchen like she'd been there for years, finding what she needed, planning the meal in her head. Beef stew, biscuits, simple, fast, substantial. She cut the beef into chunks and set it browning in a large pot. Chopped onions and potatoes. Added them to the pot with water and seasonings. While the stew simmered, she mixed biscuit dough and shaped it quickly, efficiently. Rhett watched for a few minutes, then left without a word. Mara worked. At noon, the men came in. They filed into the dining room attached to the kitchen, a long space with 2 rough-hewn tables and benches. 12 men, just like Rhett had said. They were dirty from the morning's work, smelling of sweat and horses and pine sap. They looked at her. She looked back. Nobody said anything. She brought out the stew in a big tureen and set it on the table. Then the biscuits, still hot from the oven. Then butter and coffee. The men ate. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched. They ate like they were starving, like they hadn't had a decent meal in weeks, which she suspected they hadn't. When they finished, one of them, an older man with gray in his beard, caught her eye and nodded. It wasn't much, but it was something. After they left, Rhett came back. "Well," she said, "you've got the job." Relief hit her so hard she almost staggered. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just keep cooking like that." He paused. "Go get your boy. Be back before dinner." Mara didn't argue. She grabbed her bag and started the long walk back to town. Her feet hurt worse than before. Her legs shook, but she barely felt it. She had a job. She had a place. She had a chance. By the time she made it back to Coldwater Ridge, the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. She collected Tommy from the boarding house. The gray-haired woman barely looked up when Mara returned the key, and they started the walk back to the ranch together. Tommy didn't complain. He never complained. "Is it nice, Mama?" he asked as they climbed the trail. "It's work," she said, "but it's honest work, and we'll have a place to sleep and food to eat." "Will the men be mean?" "Some might be, some won't. Either way, we'll be fine." He slipped his hand into hers. It was small and warm and trusting. She held on tight. They reached the ranch just as the light was fading. Rhett met them in the yard. "This is Tommy," Mara said. Rhett looked down at the boy. "You know how to keep yourself out of trouble?" Tommy nodded. "Good. Your mother's got enough to worry about without you adding to it." He pointed toward a small cabin near the main house. "That's yours. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. Get settled. Dinner's in an hour." The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a bed, a chair, a small table, and a stove. But it was clean, and it had a door that locked, and it was theirs. Mara set down their bags and looked around. Tommy climbed onto the bed and bounced once, testing it. "It's soft, Mama." She sat down beside him. For the first time in months, she felt something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't quite despair either. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was the simple, fragile feeling of having made it through one more day. "We're going to be okay," she said. She didn't know if it was true, but she needed him to believe it, and she needed to believe it herself. Dinner that first night was tense. The men filed in at 6, just like they had at lunch. Mara served roasted beef, mashed potatoes, and greens. She'd found a jar of preserved peaches in the storehouse and made a quick cobbler for dessert. The men ate in silence. Some glanced at her. Most didn't. One man, young, maybe 20, with a khaki set to his shoulders, muttered something to the man next to him. Mara didn't catch the words, but she caught the tone. The man next to him, the older one with the gray beard who'd nodded at lunch, said something back, low and sharp. The young man shut up. After dinner, Mara cleaned the kitchen while Tommy helped dry dishes. He was careful, focused, trying so hard to be useful. "You did good today," she told him. "I didn't do anything." "You were here. That's enough." When the kitchen was clean, she walked him back to the cabin and got him ready for bed. He was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow. Mara sat in the chair by the stove and stared at the fire. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Horses moving in the barn, men talking in low voices. Somewhere, an owl called. She thought about the young man's muttered comment, about the look she'd gotten all day, about the way people had stared at her in town. She knew what they saw. A woman too heavy, too worn, too desperate. A woman with no husband and no prospects. A woman who'd come here because she had nowhere else to go. They weren't wrong, but they also didn't know her, didn't know what she'd survived, what she'd lost, what she was willing to do to keep her son safe and fed. She'd prove herself, not because she cared what they thought, but because she had to. There was no other choice. The days that followed fell into a brutal rhythm. 4:30 in the morning, Mara was in the kitchen. Coffee first, then breakfast. Eggs, bacon, flapjacks, biscuits. The men ate like wolves and left like ghosts. After breakfast, she cleaned. Then she started on lunch. After lunch, she cleaned again and started on dinner. Between meals, she baked bread, preserved food, inventoried supplies, scrubbed floors, washed linens. The work was endless. Tommy helped where he could. He fetched water, gathered eggs from the henhouse Mara hadn't known existed until the second day, swept floors. He was quiet and careful and stayed out of the way. Some of the men ignored them completely. Some nodded in passing. One, the young one who'd muttered that first night, whose name she'd learned was Carson, made a point of complaining. The coffee was too weak, the biscuits were too hard. The stew needed more salt. Mara didn't respond. She just kept working. Rhett watched, but didn't interfere. After a week, the older man with the gray beard, his name was Dutch, stopped her after breakfast. "Don't mind Carson," he said. "He's an idiot." "I hadn't noticed," Mara said. Dutch grinned. "You're doing good work. Men are eating better than they have in months." "That's the job." "Yeah, well, some people do the job, you do it right. There's a difference." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her since she'd arrived. That night she let herself cry. Just a little. Just enough to release some of the pressure that had been building in her chest. Then she wiped her face and went to bed. 2 weeks in, a storm rolled through. It came fast and hard, dumping snow across the high country. The temperature dropped like a stone. The wind howled through gaps in the cabin walls. Mara woke in the middle of the night to find Tommy shivering beside her. She pulled him close and wrapped them both in every blanket they had. In the morning, the world was white. The men came to breakfast covered in snow, their faces red from the cold. Mara made oatmeal with brown sugar and raisins, hot coffee, fried bread. Nobody complained. After breakfast, Rhett pulled her aside. "Storm's supposed to last a few days. Men will be working in shifts to keep the livestock fed and the paths clear. They'll need hot food all day. Can you manage that?" "Yes." "You need anything?" "More firewood for the cabin. It's cold at night." He nodded. "I'll have someone bring it over." An hour later, Dutch showed up with an armload of wood and a wool blanket. "Boss said you needed these." "Thank you." He set them down and hesitated. Then he said, "You settling in okay?" "Well enough." "Good." He glanced at Tommy, who was reading in the corner. "Boy seems like good people." "He is." Dutch nodded and left. That night, with the fire burning and the new blanket wrapped around them, Mara felt something shift. Not acceptance exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. 3 weeks in, Carson finally pushed too far. It was dinner. Mara had made pot roast with vegetables. The men were eating, the usual silence filling the room. Carson shoved his plate away. "This meat's tough as boot leather." Dutch looked at him. "Tastes fine to me." "Yeah, well, you'd eat anything. And you'd complain about anything." Carson's face flushed. "I'm just saying, we're paying for decent food. We should get decent food." Mara was in the kitchen, but she could hear every word. She walked into the dining room and looked at Carson. "You have a problem with my cooking?" He smirked. "Just think we could do better, is all." "Then you're welcome to cook for yourself." "Maybe I will." "Good. Starting tomorrow, you're on your own. I'll cook for everyone else." The room went silent. Carson's smirk faded. "You can't do that. Watch me." Rhett, sitting at the head of the table, set down his fork. "She can do that. And if she does, you'll be cooking every meal for yourself while still working full days. Your choice." Carson looked around the table. Nobody backed him up. He picked up his fork. "Fine. The meat's fine." Mara went back to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from anger. She'd swallowed insults her whole life, learned to smile and nod and let things go, but she was done with that. If she was going to survive here, she couldn't be invisible. She had to push back. After dinner, Rhett found her in the kitchen. "You handled that well," he said. "Did I?" Carson needed someone to stand up to him. Most people don't bother. "I'm not most people." "No." He studied her with those hard, measuring eyes. "You're not." She waited for him to say more. He didn't. He just nodded and left. By the end of the first month, Mara had settled into the rhythm of the place. She knew which men liked their coffee strong and which preferred it mild. Knew who wanted extra biscuits and who avoided anything too sweet. Knew when to push and when to stay quiet. Tommy had found a spot for himself too. He'd started helping Dutch with small tasks around the ranch, feeding chickens, brushing horses, organizing tools. Dutch seemed to enjoy having him around. The work was still brutal. Mara's hands were raw from washing dishes in freezing water. Her back ached from lifting heavy pots. She fell into bed every night too exhausted to think. But she was managing. She was surviving. And survival, for now, was enough. One evening, after the dishes were done and Tommy was asleep, Mara walked outside to get some air. The sky was clear, the stars bright and sharp in the mountain cold. Rhett was standing near the barn, looking out at the dark shapes of the mountains. She almost turned back, but something stopped her. She walked over. "Evening," she said. He glanced at her. "Couldn't sleep?" "Just needed some air." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Rhett said, "You've done good work here." "Thank you." "Wasn't a compliment, just a fact." She almost smiled. "Noted. You planning to stay?" "As long as you'll have me." He nodded slowly. "Good. Ranch runs better with you here." It wasn't much, but coming from him, it meant something. "I appreciate that," she said. "You earned it." She looked up at the stars, thought about how far she'd come, how far she still had to go. "It's beautiful up here," she said. "It's harsh." "That too." Rhett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're tougher than you look." "I'd have to be." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he tipped his hat and walked back toward the house. Mara stayed outside a little longer, breathing in the cold, clean air. She'd made it a month. She'd keep making it, one day at a time. The second month brought snow that didn't stop. It fell in thick, heavy curtains that turned the world into something silent and white and unforgiving. The men worked in shifts, breaking ice on water troughs, hauling feed to the cattle, clearing paths between buildings. They came in for meals covered head to toe in white, their faces raw and chapped, their hands so cold they could barely hold their forks. Mara kept the kitchen hot, kept the coffee coming, kept the food heavy and warm, stews, roasts, beans thick with bacon fat, bread fresh from the oven. She stopped sleeping more than 4 or 5 hours a night. There wasn't time for more. Tommy helped where he could, but even he was starting to look worn. His face had thinned. His eyes held a tiredness that made her chest ache. "You need to rest more," she told him one morning. "I'm okay, Mama. You're 7. You shouldn't have to work like this. You work harder than me." She didn't have an answer for that. The men were getting testier too. Cabin fever, Dutch called it. Too many people stuck too close together for too long. Little arguments flared up over nothing: who left the barn door open, who used the last of the tobacco, who was pulling their weight, and who wasn't. Carson predictably was the worst. He'd been sullen since the dinner incident, but as the snow kept falling, his mood got uglier. He snapped at the other men. He complained constantly. He made sure everyone knew he was miserable. One afternoon, Mara was carrying a pot of soup from the stove to the table when Carson walked into the dining room early. "About time," he said. "I'm starving. Lunch isn't for another 10 minutes. So, food's ready, isn't it?" "It'll be ready when I say it's ready." He moved closer, too close. She could smell the sweat and anger coming off him. "You know what your problem is?" he said. "You think you're special. Think you can talk to people however you want just because you can cook a decent meal." Mara set the pot down carefully. "Step back? Or what? Or I'll make sure you regret it." He laughed. It was an ugly sound. "You threatening me? I'm warning you." "With what? You gonna hit me with a spoon?" The door behind him opened. Rhett walked in. He took in the scene. Carson standing too close, Mara backed against the table, the tension thick enough to cut. "Carson," Rhett said. His voice was quiet. That made it worse. "Get out!" Carson spun around. I don't care. Get out. Now." For a second, it looked like Carson might argue. Then something in Rhett's expression changed his mind. He left. Rhett looked at Mara. "You all right?" "Fine." "He touch you?" "No." "If he does, you tell me. I can handle Carson. I know you can, but you shouldn't have to." He picked up the pot she'd set down and carried it to the table. "Man's been a problem since the day I hired him. Only reason he's still here is we're short-handed, but that doesn't give him the right to make your life harder." Mara watched him set the pot down. Rhett Calder wasn't a man who wasted words, wasn't a man who showed much emotion. But there was something in the way he'd walked into that room, like he'd been ready to break Carson in half if needed. "Thank you," she said. He shrugged. "Don't thank me. Just doing what's right." That evening, Carson didn't show up for dinner. "He quit," Dutch told her when she asked. "Packed his gear and headed down the mountain. Said he'd had enough." "In this weather?" "Yep." Rhett tried to talk him into waiting till the storm passed, but Carson's got more pride than sense. He'll probably make it to town. "Probably." Mara ladled stew into bowls and tried not to feel guilty. She failed. "It's not your fault," Dutch said quietly. "Carson was a bomb waiting to go off. You just happened to be standing nearby when he did." Rhett's short-handed now. Rhett's always short-handed. That's ranch life. Don't lose sleep over it. But she did lose sleep over it. That night she lay awake thinking about Carson trudging through the snow, angry and alone. Thinking about what it meant that a man would rather risk freezing to death than work alongside her. Thinking about all the other men who probably felt the same way but hid it better. She got up before dawn and went to the kitchen, started the fire, started the coffee, started the day. Tommy found her an hour later, already elbow-deep in biscuit dough. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Too much to do. He didn't believe her. He was 7, but he wasn't stupid. He just sat at the table and watched her work. After a while, he said, "That man who left, the mean one, is it because of us?" Mara stopped kneading. "No, baby. It's because of him. Some people carry so much anger they don't know what to do with it, except spread it around." Are people always going to be angry at us? She wanted to lie. Wanted to tell him everything would be fine, that people would see them for who they really were, that kindness and hard work would win out in the end. But she'd learned the hard way that the world didn't work like that. Some will, she said, but some won't, and the ones who won't, those are the ones who matter. He thought about that. Then he nodded and went to fetch water for the coffee. She watched him go and felt something crack inside her chest. He deserved better than this. But this was all she had to give. The storm finally broke 3 days later. The sun came out, hard and bright, turning the snow into something that hurt to look at. The men emerged from the bunkhouse like bears from hibernation, blinking and stretching and eager to get back to real work. Mara stood in the kitchen doorway and watched them move across the yard. They looked smaller somehow, harder, like the winter had filed off their soft edges. She probably looked the same way. Rhett walked over to her. "Storm's done. Road should be clear enough to get supplies up from town in a few days. Make me a list of what you need." "I will." He hesitated. Then he said, "You did good during the storm. Kept everyone fed and warm. That's no small thing." "It's my job." "Yeah, but you did it better than most would have." He looked out at the men. Carson wasn't worth keeping anyway. Man couldn't take orders and couldn't keep his mouth shut. You're worth 10 of him. Mara felt heat rise to her face. Not embarrassment, something else. "I appreciate that." "It's not a compliment, just a fact." She almost smiled. "You've said that before." "Still true." He walked away before she could respond. That afternoon, Dutch came to the kitchen with Tommy in tow. "Found this one trying to muck out the horse stalls," Dutch said. "Figured you should know." Mara looked at Tommy. He was covered in dirt and hay and looked thoroughly pleased with himself. "I was helping," Tommy said. "You were supposed to be reading." "I finished my book." "Then you should have come found me." "You were busy." Dutch coughed to hide a laugh. "Kid's not wrong. You're always busy." Mara sighed. "Is he in the way?" "Nah. Actually, he's pretty useful. Got small hands. Can reach places I can't." Dutch looked at Tommy. "If it's all right with your ma, you can help me in the afternoons, after you finish whatever chores she gives you." Tommy's face lit up. "Really?" Mara wanted to say no, wanted to keep him close and safe and away from the hard, dangerous work of the ranch. But she also knew he needed more than just her. Needed to feel useful. Needed to learn from someone who wasn't exhausted and scared all the time. "All right," she said, "but you do exactly what Dutch tells you. No wandering off, no taking risks." "I won't, Mama. I promise." Dutch grinned. "Don't worry. I'll keep an eye on him." After they left, Mara stood alone in the kitchen and wondered when she'd become the kind of mother who let her 7-year-old work in a barn. Then she reminded herself that survival didn't care about the kind of mother she wanted to be. It only cared about the kind of mother she had to be. The supply wagon came up from town 4 days later. Mara went through the deliveries carefully, checking everything against her list. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt, beans, rice, dried fruit, spices. Everything she'd asked for was there, almost everything. "Where's the lard?" she asked the wagon driver. He checked his manifest. "Says here you got 2 tins. I ordered 4. "Well, I only got 2. Mara bit back frustration. "Fine, I'll make do." The driver shrugged. "Always something, ain't it?" After he left, she stood in the storehouse and recalculated her supplies. 2 tins of lard would last maybe 3 weeks if she was careful. After that, she'd have to improvise. Use more butter, render fat from the beef, stretch everything as far as it would go. She was good at stretching things. She'd been doing it her whole life. That evening, she made fried chicken for dinner. The men ate like they'd forgotten what fried food tasted like. "This is incredible," one of them said. His name was Porter. Young, quiet, worked harder than he talked. "It's just chicken," Mara said. "Yeah, but it's good chicken." Dutch nodded. "Best meal we've had in weeks." "Best meal we've had in months," another man added. Mara carried the empty platters back to the kitchen and tried not to let their praise mean too much. Tried and failed. Later, after everything was cleaned and put away, she sat in the cabin with Tommy and counted her money. She'd saved almost all of her wages, had barely spent a dime. $30 from the first month, $30 from the second, $60 total. It wasn't enough to start over somewhere else. Wasn't enough to rent a place in town. But it was more than she'd had in a long time. More than nothing. "What are you going to do with it?" Tommy asked. "Save it for emergencies." What kind of emergencies? She thought about all the things that could go wrong. Illness, injury, another winter storm, the ranch going under, Rhett deciding he didn't need her anymore. Any kind, she said. He accepted that and went back to his book. Mara put the money in a tin and hid it under the floorboard beneath the bed. Not the best hiding place, but the best she had. Then she lay down and stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about how fragile everything still was. Winter dragged on. The work became routine. Wake, cook, clean, sleep. Repeat. The men became familiar. She learned their names, their habits, their moods. Learned who to avoid when they were angry and who to talk to when they were sad. She learned that Porter had a sweetheart back in town he was saving money to marry. That Dutch had been a soldier once and didn't like to talk about it. That a man named Sykes played harmonica on Sunday evenings, and the sound of it made everyone a little less lonely. She learned that Rhett got up earlier than anyone else and worked later than everyone else and never complained about anything. She learned that ranch life was hard and brutal and unforgiving, but it was also honest. Nobody lied about who they were or what they wanted. Nobody pretended. She appreciated that. One night in late February, a rider came up from town. It was after dark. The men were in the bunkhouse. Mara was in the kitchen finishing the last of the dishes when she heard the horse. Rhett met the rider in the yard. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see Rhett's posture change, could see him go tense. The rider left. Rhett stood in the yard for a long moment, then walked to the kitchen. "Everything all right?" Mara asked. "No." He took off his hat and turned it in his hands. "There's trouble." "What kind?" "The kind that's been coming for a while." She waited. He sighed. "There's a man named Voss. Runs cattle on the land west of here. We've had disputes before. Grazing rights, water access, boundary lines, normal rancher stuff. But he's been pushing harder lately, sending his men onto my land, running my fence lines, making threats." "What kind of threats?" "The kind that say he wants what I have and doesn't care how he gets it." Mara set down the dish she'd been washing. "What are you going to do?" "Same thing I always do. Stand my ground, protect what's mine." He looked at her. "But it might get ugly. If it does, I want you and the boy to go down to town. Stay there until it's over. If there's trouble, you'll need everyone here." "I need everyone who can fight. You're not a fighter." "You don't know what I am." Mara, I'm not running. I've run enough. If there's work to be done here, I'll do it." Rhett studied her for a long moment. "You're stubborn." "So are you." He almost smiled. "Fair point. When is this Voss coming?" "Don't know. Could be tomorrow. Could be next week. Ryder said he's been talking big in town, making noise about teaching me a lesson." Rhett put his hat back on. "I just wanted you to know, so you're not caught off guard." "I appreciate that." He nodded and left. Mara finished the dishes slowly, her mind working. She'd survived a lot in her life. A husband's death, poverty, humiliation. The slow, grinding loss of everything she'd once had. But she'd never faced violence. Never had to stand against men who wanted to take by force what they couldn't get by right. She wasn't sure she was ready for it, but she also wasn't sure she had a choice. The next few days were tense. Rhett doubled the watch. Men took turns riding the fence lines, checking for signs of trouble. Everyone carried rifles. Even meals became quieter, more focused. Dutch found Mara in the kitchen one morning. "You know how to shoot?" he asked. "A little. My husband taught me, but I'm not very good." "Good enough is good enough." He handed her a revolver. "Keep this with you. just in case. She took it. The weight was heavier than she remembered. I don't want to use this. Nobody does. But if it comes down to you or them, I want you to have a choice. She tucked the gun into her apron pocket. It felt wrong there, dangerous. But so did everything else these days. Tommy noticed the change in atmosphere. He didn't ask questions, but she could see the worry in his eyes. We're safe, she told him. Nobody's going to hurt us. Is someone trying to? She wanted to lie. Couldn't. Maybe. But Mr. Calder and the men are making sure that doesn't happen. What if they can't? Then we'll handle it ourselves. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. 7 years old and already learning that safety was something you fought for, not something you were given. She hated it, but she couldn't change it. A week passed, then another. Nothing happened. The tension started to ease. Men stopped carrying rifles everywhere. The watch rotated back to normal. Even Rhett seemed less on edge. Mara started to think maybe Voss had been all talk. She should have known better. It was a Thursday afternoon when the fire started. Mara was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she smelled smoke. Not the normal smoke from the stove or the fireplaces. This was different. Thicker, meaner. She ran outside. The hayfield beyond the barn was burning. Flames ripped across the dried grass, spreading fast, driven by the wind. Men were already running toward it, shouting, grabbing buckets and shovels. Rhett was in the middle of it, yelling orders. Get the horses out of the barn. Move the cattle to the north pasture. Someone ride to town for help. Mara stood frozen for just a second. Then she ran. Not away. Toward. She grabbed 2 buckets from the kitchen and ran to the pump. Filled them. Carried them toward the fire line where men were trying to beat back the flames. What are you doing? Dutch shouted when he saw her. Helping! Get back to the house! No! She threw water on the nearest flames. It hissed and steamed and did almost nothing, but she ran back to the pump anyway. Filled the buckets again. Carried them back. Again. 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 Her arms burned. Her lungs burned. Her eyes watered from the smoke. She didn't stop. Other men joined the line. They formed a chain, passing buckets from the pump to the fire. Mara was in the middle, hauling and passing and hauling again. The fire fought back. It jumped a fire break and caught the corner of the barn. Men swarmed it with shovels and wet blankets. Someone screamed. Mara looked over and saw Porter on the ground, his leg twisted wrong. She dropped her buckets and ran to him. I'm fine, he gasped. Just get back to... Shut up. She grabbed him under the arms and dragged him away from the flames. He was heavy, dead weight, but she didn't stop until he was clear. Dutch appeared beside her. I've got him. You get back to the pump. She didn't argue. The fight went on for hours. By the time they finally got the fire under control, the sun was setting and everyone was black with soot and exhausted beyond words. Mara stood by the pump, hands blistered and shaking, and looked at the damage. Half the hayfield was gone. Part of the barn was scorched. The air stank of smoke and burned grass. But the ranch was still standing. Rhett walked over to her. His face was streaked with ash. His hands were bleeding. You should have stayed in the house, he said. So should you. He looked at her, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. Thank you, he said. She nodded, couldn't find words. He walked away to check on the men. Mara went back to the kitchen and made food. She didn't know what else to do. Didn't know how to process what had just happened. So she did what she always did. She worked. By the time the men came in for a late dinner, she'd made stew and biscuits and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. They ate in silence. Too tired to talk, too shaken to joke. After they left, Mara sat down at the table and finally let herself shake. Tommy came in from the cabin where she'd told him to stay. Mama? She pulled him into her arms and held on tight. We're okay, she whispered. We're okay. But she knew it wasn't true. The fire hadn't been an accident, and whoever said it wasn't done yet. The morning after the fire, Rhett found boot prints near the hayfield. 3 sets, maybe 4, leading in from the west ridge and back out again. Someone had walked right up to the field, set the blaze, and disappeared into the trees. Mara watched from the kitchen window as Rhett crouched in the dirt, studying the tracks. Dutch and 2 other men stood nearby, rifles in hand, scanning the tree line like they expected someone to come charging out. Nobody did. When Rhett came back to the house, His jaw was set so tight she thought his teeth might crack. "It was Voss," he said. "You're sure?" "Sure enough. His men wear a specific kind of boot, logging boots with a double heel. 3 of those tracks match." He poured himself coffee, drank it in one long swallow. "He's trying to bleed me out. Burn my feed, spook my cattle, make it so expensive to keep running that I have to sell." "Will you?" He looked at her like she'd suggested he cut off his own arm. "No." "Even if he keeps coming?" "Especially if he keeps coming. I don't bow to bullies." Mara thought about Carson, about the men in town who'd looked at her like dirt, about every person who'd ever tried to make her feel small. "Good," she said. "Neither do I." Rhett almost smiled. "I noticed." He left to organize patrols. Mara went back to work, but the gun Dutch had given her stayed in her apron pocket, just in case. That afternoon, a man rode up from town, not one of Voss's men. This one wore a suit that had seen better days and carried himself with the weary authority of someone who'd been doing a job too long. Sheriff Macklin. Mara had heard of him. Everyone had. He was supposed to be fair, supposed to keep the peace, but supposed to didn't always mean much when money and power were involved. Rhett met him in the yard. Mara stood in the kitchen doorway, close enough to hear. "Heard you had some trouble," Macklin said. "Someone set fire to my hayfield, burned half of it before we could stop it." "You got proof it was arson?" "Boot prints leading in and out, 3 or 4 men, logging boots with double heels." Macklin's expression didn't change. "That's not proof, that's tracks. Could have been anyone. Could have been Voss's men." "You got witnesses? Someone who saw them set it?" "No." "Then it's your word against nobody's, and nobody doesn't hold up in court." Rhett's hands curled into fists. "So you're not going to do anything." "I'm saying I need evidence, not suspicions." Macklin shifted in his saddle. "Look, Calder, I know you and Voss have been at each other's throats for years, but I can't arrest a man based on the kind of boots his workers wear. You know that. What I know is that if someone burns down half my operation, I've got a right to expect the law to care. I do care. But caring doesn't give me authority to act without proof." Macklin glanced toward the burned field. "You got insurance?" "Some." "Then file a claim and rebuild. And if something else happens, something you can prove, you let me know." He rode off before Rhett could respond. Mara walked over to where Rhett stood, staring at the dust cloud the sheriff's horse had left behind. "He's not going to help," she said. "No, he's not." "So what do we do?" Rhett looked at her. "We protect what's ours. And we make damn sure Voss knows he picked the wrong fight." The next week passed in a kind of armed tension. Men worked in pairs. Nobody went anywhere without a rifle. Watches were doubled again. Even meals felt like strategy sessions, with men discussing sightlines and approach routes, and what to do if Voss's crew came back. Mara kept cooking, kept the men fed, kept Tommy close. But she also started paying attention to things she'd never thought about before. Where the guns were kept, how to load the rifle Dutch had shown her, which windows in the cabin had the best view of the yard. She was learning to think like someone who might have to fight. It made her sick, but she did it anyway. One evening, Dutch found her sitting outside the cabin, cleaning the revolver he'd given her. "You're getting the hang of it," he said. "I hate it. Most people do." He sat down on the step beside her. "But hate doesn't make it less necessary. I came here to cook, not to fight a war. Life's funny that way. You plan for one thing, get another." She looked at him. "You ever regret staying, working on a ranch where this kind of thing happens?" "Every day." He pulled out a pipe and started packing it with tobacco. "But I regret a lot of things. At least here I'm useful. At least here I matter." "You could matter somewhere safer." "Could. But safe doesn't mean better." He lit the pipe. "You thinking about leaving?" The question caught her off guard. "No." "Good. Because Rhett needs you. Men need you. Hell, even I need you. You're the only reason this place hasn't fallen apart." "That's not true." "It is. You just don't see it." He stood up, knees cracking. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be another long day." He was right. The next morning, Mara woke to shouting. She grabbed the revolver and ran outside in her nightdress. Men were pouring out of the bunkhouse. Rhett was already in the yard, holding a rifle. Everyone was looking toward the main gate. Someone had left a dead cow there. Not just dead, butchered, throat cut, guts spilled, blood everywhere, and written in the dirt beside it, in letters big enough to read from across the yard. Leave or burn. Tommy came out of the cabin behind her. Go back inside, Mara said. Mama. Now, Tommy. He went. Mara walked toward the gate, gun still in her hand. The men parted to let her through. The cow was one of theirs. She recognized the brand. They killed it somewhere else and dragged it here, Dutch said quietly. Probably did it last night while we were sleeping. Rhett's face was stone. They were here, right outside, and we didn't hear a thing. We can't watch everywhere at once, Porter said. His leg was still healing from the fire. He leaned on a crutch. Not with the crew we've got. Then we get more crew. With what money? The fire cost us half the winter feed. Insurance won't pay out for weeks. We're already stretched thin. Rhett didn't answer. He just stared at the dead cow and the message in the dirt. Mara stepped forward. Clean it up. Everyone looked at her. Clean it up, she repeated. Get rid of the cow. Erase the message. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing it still here when they come back. They're coming back? Someone asked. Of course they're coming back. They're testing us, seeing if we'll break. She looked at Rhett. We're not going to break. Something shifted in his expression. No, we're not. He started giving orders. Men moved to follow them. Mara went back to the kitchen and started breakfast. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the knife. But she cooked anyway. That afternoon, 3 riders appeared on the western ridge. They sat there on their horses, backlit by the sun, just watching. Rhett and Dutch stood in the yard, rifles ready. The other men were scattered around the property, armed and alert. The riders didn't move, just watched. After about 10 minutes, they turned and rode away. What was that? Porter asked. A message, Rhett said. They're telling us they can come whenever they want, that we can't stop them. Can we? We're gonna try. That night, Rhett called a meeting in the dining room. All the men gathered. Mara stood in the back, arms crossed. Here's the situation, Rhett said. Voss wants this land. He's willing to burn us out, kill our stock, and scare us off to get it. The law won't help. We're on our own. So what do we do? Sykes asked. We fight, but smart. We can't match him man for man. He's got more crew, more money, more resources, but we've got something he doesn't. What's that? We're already here. This is our home, and we know every inch of it. Rhett pointed to a map he'd laid out on the table. We set up better defenses. We control the approaches. We make it so hard to get to us that it's not worth the effort. That's a siege mentality, Dutch said. We can't live like that forever. We won't have to. Voss is impatient. He'll either escalate or give up. Either way, we'll be ready. And if he escalates? Rhett met his eyes. Then we make sure he regrets it. The men dispersed to their assignments. Mara stayed behind. You really think this will work? She asked. I think it's the only chance we've got. What if it's not enough? Then we lose. But at least we'll lose on our feet, not on our knees. She thought about that, about what it meant to stand when everything was pushing you down, about how familiar that feeling was. I'm with you, she said. Whatever happens. Rhett looked at her for a long moment. I know. Over the next few days, the ranch transformed into something that looked more like a fort. Men dug trenches along the access roads, built barricades, set up watch posts with clear lines of sight, stockpiled ammunition and supplies in case they got cut off from town. Mara did her part. She inventoried the food stores, calculated how long they could hold out without resupply, preserved everything she could, rationed where necessary. Tommy helped where he could, but she could see the fear in his eyes. Are we going to die? He asked one night. She wanted to say no, wanted to promise him safety, but she'd stopped making promises she couldn't keep. I don't know, she said, but I know we're going to fight like hell to make sure we don't. I'm scared. Me too, baby. Me too. He curled up against her, and she held him until he fell asleep. Then she sat alone in the dark and wondered what the hell she was doing. She'd come here to survive, to feed her son, to find some small measure of stability. Instead, she was in the middle of a range war with a man who wanted to burn them all to the ground. She could leave, take Tommy, and walk down the mountain and never look back. But something in her refused. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the simple, bone-deep need to stop running. Whatever it was, it kept her planted. The attack came on a Tuesday. It was just after noon. Mara was in the kitchen making lunch when she heard gunshots. Not close. distant, but unmistakable. She grabbed her gun and ran outside. Men were running toward the north fence line, rifles up. More shots, shouting. Red appeared beside her. Get inside, lock the door. What's happening? They're hitting the cattle, trying to stampede them. He grabbed his rifle. Stay in the house. He ran. Mara stood there for half a second, her heart hammering. Then she ran back to the cabin, grabbed Tommy, and locked them both inside the main house. The shooting went on for 20 minutes. It felt like hours. Mara stood at the window, gun in hand, watching men run back and forth across the yard, watching smoke rise from somewhere beyond the trees, watching and waiting and trying not to scream. Finally, it stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. She waited, counted to 100, waited some more. Then Rhett came back. He was limping. Blood soaked through his pant leg. Mara ran to him. You're hit. It's nothing. Grazed. Sit down. I'm fine. Sit down before you fall down. He sat. She knelt and examined the wound. It was more than a graze, but not as bad as it could have been. The bullet had carved a furrow along his thigh, deep enough to bleed, but not deep enough to hit anything vital. You need a doctor, she said. There's no time. Just wrap it. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed clean cloth and whiskey, and came back. Tommy stood in the corner, watching with wide eyes. It's okay, Mara told him. Mr. Calder's going to be fine. She cleaned the wound with whiskey. Rhett hissed, but didn't pull away. What happened out there? She asked as she worked. 6 men, maybe 7. They came in from the north, fired into the herd, tried to scatter them. We drove them off, but they got about 20 head running. He winced as she tied the bandage. Lost 1 steer over a cliff. The rest will round up tomorrow. Anyone else hurt? Sykes took a bullet in the shoulder. Porter's watching him. He'll live. Mara finished tying off the bandage and sat back. Her hands were shaking again. This is insane, she said. People are getting shot over grazing land. It's not about the land. It's about power. Voss wants to prove he can take whatever he wants, and I'm proving he can't. At what cost? Rhett looked at her. At whatever cost it takes. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just stood up and went to make lunch. Because that's what she did. That's all she knew how to do. That night, Rhett gathered the men again. They're escalating, he said. Today was a probe. Next time, they'll come harder. How much harder can they come? Porter asked. They're already shooting at us. They could burn the whole place down. Kill the stock. Kill us. Rhett's voice was flat. Voss doesn't care about the law. He cares about winning, and he's willing to do whatever it takes. So are we just supposed to wait for him to kill us? No, we're going to hit back. The room went quiet. What do you mean? Dutch asked carefully. I mean, we take the fight to him. Make him understand that every time he hits us, we hit him twice as hard. That's a war. We're already in a war. We just haven't been fighting it. Mara listened from the doorway. She wanted to object, wanted to say this was crazy, that violence only bred more violence, that someone needed to be the adult and walk away. But she also knew that walking away meant losing everything, and she was tired of losing. What's the plan? She heard herself say. Everyone turned to look at her. Rhett's eyes met hers. You sure you want to know? I'm here, aren't I? I'm part of this, whether I want to be or not. So yes, I want to know. He nodded slowly. Voss runs his operation out of a lumber camp about 15 miles west. He's got equipment there, saws, wagons, oxen. If we take that out, we hurt him where it counts. You're going to sabotage his camp? I'm going to make it so expensive for him to keep coming at us that he gives up. Dutch rubbed his jaw. That's risky. Real risky. Everything's risky right now. When? Porter asked. 2 nights from now. We'll go in quiet. Do the damage. Get out before anyone knows we were there. How many men? 4, me, Dutch, Sykes, if his shoulder's up to it, and 1 more. I'll go, Porter said immediately. Your leg's still healing. It's good enough. Rhett looked around the room. Anyone else? Silence. Then Mara said, I'll go. Every head turned. No, Rhett said immediately. Why not? Because you're not trained for this. Because it's dangerous. Because I'm a woman. Because you've got a son to think about. I'm always thinking about my son. That's why I'm doing this. If we lose, he loses everything. I'm not letting that happen. Rhett stood up, walked over to her. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking to fight for what's mine. You could get killed. I could get killed here when they come back. At least this way I'm doing something about it. They stared at each other. Finally, Rhett said, If you come, you follow orders. No questions, no hesitation. Agreed. And if something happens to you, that's on you, not me. I understand. He looked like he wanted to argue more, but instead he just nodded. 2 nights, he said. Be ready. The meeting broke up. Men filed out, talking in low voices. Mara stayed behind. Dutch approached her. You sure about this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Why? She thought about every time she'd been pushed, every time she'd been told she didn't belong, every time she'd had to swallow her pride and accept whatever scraps the world threw her. Because I'm tired of being afraid, she said. Dutch nodded slowly. Fair enough. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Rhett taught her how to move quietly, how to stay low, how to signal without talking. He drilled her on the plan until she could recite it in her sleep. Dutch checked her gun, made sure she knew how to use it. Sykes, shoulder bandaged but functional, showed her how to set a fire that would burn hot and fast. She learned, absorbed, practiced, and tried not to think about what could go wrong. The night before they left, she sat with Tommy in the cabin. I have to go away tomorrow night, she said, just for a little while. Where? I can't tell you, but I'll be back before morning. He looked at her with those 2 old eyes. You're going to fight, aren't you? She couldn't lie to him. Yes. Are you going to come back? I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I do. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I don't want you to go. I know, baby. I don't want to go either, but I have to. Why? Because if I don't, we might lose everything, and I can't let that happen. He nodded. Didn't cry, just nodded. She pulled him close and held on tight. I love you, she whispered, more than anything in this world. Remember that. I will, Mama. That night she barely slept, and when dawn came, she got up and made breakfast like it was any other day. Because if she stopped to think too hard about what she was about to do, she'd lose her nerve. And she couldn't afford to lose her nerve. Not now. Not when everything depended on her staying strong. They left just after midnight, 5 of them on horseback, moving through the darkness like shadows. Rhett led. Dutch rode beside him. Sykes and Porter followed. Mara brought up the rear, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The night was cold and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like thrown salt. The horse's breath came out in white clouds. Nobody spoke. They rode for 2 hours, following trails Mara had never seen, cutting through dense forest where the trees pressed close enough to scrape her shoulders. Her hands were numb on the reins. Her legs ached from gripping the saddle. But she kept moving. When they finally stopped, they were on a ridge overlooking a valley. Below, barely visible in the darkness, was Voss's lumber camp. A few scattered buildings, stacks of cut timber, equipment sheds, 2 wagons parked near what looked like a barn, a single light burning in one of the buildings. Rhett dismounted and motioned for the others to do the same. They gathered close, speaking in whispers. That's the equipment shed, Rhett said, pointing. That's where the saws are kept. The wagons are there. The oxen are probably in that barn. How many men? Dutch asked. Could be anywhere from 3 to 10. Hard to say. That's a big range. It's the best I've got. Porter shifted his weight off his bad leg. What's the play? We split up. Dutch and I take the equipment shed. Sykes, you and Porter handle the wagons. Mara, you stay with the horses. If something goes wrong, you ride back and warn the ranch. I didn't come here to hold horses, Mara said. Rhett turned to look at her. And I didn't bring you here to get killed. You stay with the horses. I can help. You help by being the backup. If we don't make it out, someone needs to get home and tell the others what happened. She wanted to argue, wanted to prove she was just as capable as any of them, but she also knew he was right. Fine, she said. They moved down the ridge on foot, leaving the horses tied in the trees. Mara waited with them, watching the others disappear into the darkness. The minutes crawled. She stood there, gun in hand, listening to the night sounds. Wind in the trees, distant owl calls, the creak of branches. Then she heard voices. Faint, coming from the camp. Men talking, laughing, more than 3, more than 5. Her stomach dropped. She saw movement near the equipment shed. Rhett and Dutch, low and quiet. They reached the door. Dutch pulled out a pry bar and worked at the lock. The voices got louder. Someone was walking toward the shed. Mara's breath stopped. Rhett and Dutch froze. The man, just a silhouette in the darkness, walked past the shed without looking, headed toward the building with the light. Rhett and Dutch went back to work. The lock gave. They slipped inside. Mara counted seconds. 30, 40, 50. Then she saw flame, small at first, just a flicker through the shed window. Then bigger, brighter. Rhett and Dutch came running out. At the same time, Sykes and Porter were at the wagons. She saw Sykes strike a match. The whole camp lit up in seconds. Shouts erupted from the buildings. Men poured out. Someone started ringing a bell. Rhett and Dutch were running back toward the ridge. Sykes and Porter right behind them. Then gunfire. Mara saw the muzzle flashes before she heard the shots. Men were firing from the buildings, aiming at the shadows running through the camp. She started moving toward them without thinking. "Get back!" someone yelled. She didn't listen. Porter stumbled, went down. Sykes grabbed him, hauled him up. They kept running. More gunshots. Bullets kicked up dirt around them. Mara raised her gun and fired back. Once, twice, 3 times. She didn't know if she hit anything, didn't care. She just wanted them to stop shooting at her people. Dutch reached the ridge first, then Rhett, then Sykes, dragging Porter. "Go!" Rhett shouted. "Get to the horses!" They ran. Behind them, the camp was fully ablaze now. The equipment shed was an inferno. The wagons were burning. Men were shouting, trying to organize, trying to fight the fires and chase the attackers at the same time. They reached the horses, mounted up, rode. The gunfire followed them for a while, then faded. They didn't slow down until they were miles away. When they finally stopped to breathe, everyone was shaking. "Is anyone hit?" Rhett asked. "Porter caught one in the side," Sykes said. "Not deep, but he's bleeding." Porter was pale, holding his ribs. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Let me see." Mara dismounted and went to him, lifted his shirt. The bullet had grazed his ribs, tearing through skin and muscle, but missing anything vital. "You're lucky," she said. "Don't feel lucky." She used cloth from her pack to bind the wound. Her hands were steadier than she expected. "We need to keep moving," Rhett said. "They might follow." "They're too busy putting out fires," Dutch said. "We bought ourselves some time." They rode on. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky was starting to lighten. Gray dawn creeping over the mountains. The men who'd stayed behind met them in the yard. "Did it work?" one of them asked. "It worked," Rhett said. He dismounted, stiff and tired. Voss lost his equipment shed and 2 wagons, maybe more. That'll set him back weeks. "And now he knows we'll fight," Dutch added. "Now he knows," Rhett agreed. Mara slid off her horse and handed the reins to someone else. Her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. Tommy came running out of the main house. She caught him, held him tight. "You came back," he whispered. "I told you I would." She looked over his head and saw Rhett watching her. He nodded once. She nodded back. Then she took Tommy inside and tried to forget what it felt like to shoot at another human being. The retaliation came 3 days later. Mara was in the kitchen when she heard horses, lots of them. She ran to the window. 10 men rode into the yard, all armed. At the front was a man she'd never seen before but knew immediately. Voss. He was older than she'd expected. 50, maybe. Gray hair, hard face, expensive clothes that looked out of place in the mountains. He sat his horse like he owned the world. Rhett walked out to meet him. Dutch and the others followed, rifles ready. Mara grabbed her gun and moved to the door where she could hear. "Calder," Voss said. His voice was smooth, educated. "We need to talk." "Nothing to talk about," Rhett said. "I think there is. Someone burned my equipment shed, destroyed 2 wagons, cost me a lot of money." "That's unfortunate." "Don't play stupid. I know it was you." "You know a lot of things that aren't true." Voss smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pay for the damage, and then you're going to sell me this land at a fair price, or I'm going to take it from you. I'm not paying you a dime, and I'm not selling. Then you're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be my first." Voss's smile faded. "I'm trying to be civilized about this. But if you want to do it the hard way, we can do it the hard way. I've been doing it the hard way my whole life. Not like this, you haven't. Voss looked around the yard. His eyes landed on Mara, standing in the doorway. That your cook? Rhett's posture changed, went rigid. That's none of your business. Everything on this land is my business, because soon it'll all be mine. Voss tipped his hat toward Mara. Ma'am. She didn't respond. Voss looked back at Rhett. You've got 1 week. After that, I stop asking nicely. He wheeled his horse around and rode out, his men following. The yard was silent after they left. Then Rhett said, Everyone inside, now. They gathered in the dining room. The tension was thick enough to choke on. He's not bluffing, Dutch said. 1 week, he'll come with everything he's got. Let him come, Rhett said. We can't fight that many men. Not and win. Then we don't fight them head on. We make them come to us. We make it costly. It's already costly. Porter's got a hole in him. Sykes can barely lift his arm. We're running out of men and time. Rhett slammed his hand on the table. I am not giving up this land. I'm not saying give up. I'm saying think. There has to be another way. There isn't. Mara spoke up from the back of the room. There might be. Everyone turned to look at her. What if we go to the territorial governor, she said. Governor won't care, Rhett said. He might if we can prove Voss is operating outside the law. If we document everything, the fire, the dead cow, the attack on the cattle, the threats. If we can show a pattern of violence and intimidation, the governor might step in. That takes time we don't have. Then we buy time. We hold out for 1 week. Make it so hard for Voss to take us that he has to pause and regroup. And in that pause, we get word to the governor. Dutch rubbed his jaw. It's not a bad idea. It's a long shot, Rhett said. Everything's a long shot right now. Rhett looked at Mara, really looked. You think this could work? I think it's better than sitting here waiting to die. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Fine. Dutch, you ride to the territorial capital. Take Porter with you. Get him to a doctor while you're at it. The rest of us will hold the fort. I'm not leaving, Porter said. You're bleeding, and you can barely stand. You're leaving. Porter looked like he wanted to argue. Didn't. What about the rest of us? Sykes asked. We dig in. We prepare. And we make damn sure that when Voss comes, he bleeds for every inch. The men dispersed to their tasks. Mara started to leave, but Rhett stopped her. That was smart, he said. The governor idea. It might not work. But it's better than nothing. He hesitated. You did good out there, at Voss's camp. Kept your head. Didn't panic. I was terrified the whole time. Brave isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing it anyway. She looked at him. He looked back. Something passed between them. Something that had been building for weeks, but neither of them had named. I should get back to work, she said. Yeah, me too. But neither of them moved. Finally, Rhett said, When this is over, don't, Mara interrupted. Don't say anything you might not mean. Not yet. He nodded slowly. All right. She went back to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking again. But this time, it wasn't from fear. The next few days were frantic. They fortified every building, built barricades, stockpiled ammunition, set up fire lines and escape routes. Mara organized the food supplies, made sure they could hold out for weeks if necessary. She also started documenting everything in a ledger, dates, incidents, damages. Building the case they'd need for the governor. Tommy helped where he could. He was quieter than usual, more watchful. Are we going to die, Mama? He asked one night. It was the second time he'd asked that question. No, she said. This time she meant it. We're going to fight, and we're going to win. How do you know? Because we don't have any other choice. He accepted that, curled up beside her, fell asleep. Mara lay awake, listening to the sounds of men working outside, hammering, sawing, the low murmur of voices. She thought about everything that had led her here, the death of her husband, the loss of her home, the desperate journey to this mountain, the months of back-breaking work. She thought about the woman she'd been when she arrived, broken, ashamed, invisible, and the woman she was now, armed, angry, ready to fight. She didn't know if the change was good or bad, but she knew it was permanent. On the 6th day, a messenger arrived from town. He was young, out of breath, his horse lathered from a hard ride. Voss is gathering his crew, he said. Word is he's planning to move tomorrow, maybe the day after. How many men? Rhett asked. 20, maybe more. He's been hiring anyone who'll take his money. Rhett's jaw tightened. Thanks for the warning. The messenger nodded and rode off. That night, Rhett called everyone together one last time. They're coming, he said. Could be tomorrow. Could be the day after. Either way, we need to be ready. We're as ready as we'll ever be, Dutch said. Good. Rhett looked around at the assembled men, at Mara standing in the back, at the ranch they'd all worked so hard to protect. I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be ugly. Some of us might not make it, but I want you to know, every one of you, that I'm proud to stand with you. The men nodded. A few murmured agreement. Get some rest, Rhett said. Tomorrow, we fight. They dispersed. Mara went back to the cabin. She kissed Tommy goodnight, locked the door, loaded her gun. Then she sat by the window and waited for dawn. It came slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Blood colors, she thought. Then she pushed the thought away and focused on what needed to be done. But the attack didn't come at dawn. It didn't come at midday either. By late afternoon, everyone was on edge. Nerves frayed, tempers short. Maybe he changed his mind, someone said. He didn't change his mind, Rhett said. He's waiting for something. What? I don't know, but stay alert. The sun sank toward the horizon. Shadows lengthened across the yard. And then, just as the light was starting to fade, someone shouted from the watchpost. Riders, coming in from the west. Mara's heart jumped into her throat. She grabbed her gun and ran outside. But it wasn't Voss. It was Dutch and Porter, riding hard, with Sheriff Macklin and 3 deputies behind them. Rhett met them in the yard. What's this? Macklin dismounted. Got a message from the governor's office. Said there's been reports of violence and intimidation in this area. Sent me to investigate. Dutch? We made it to the Capitol, Dutch said. He looked exhausted, but triumphant. Governor read the ledger Mara put together. Sent a telegram to the sheriff. Told him to get up here and sort it out. Macklin pulled out a piece of paper. I've got orders to arrest anyone engaging in arson, theft, or assault. That include you, Calder? I've been defending my property. Can you prove that? Rhett gestured to the burned field. The damaged barn. What does it look like? Macklin looked around, took in the fortifications, the armed men, the evidence of recent violence. Looks like a war zone, he said. That's because it is. And Voss? Is the one who started it. Macklin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll need statements from everyone. Written testimony, dates, times, witnesses, and then I'll ride out to Voss's camp and get his side. He'll lie. Probably, but if enough evidence points one way, lying won't help him. Macklin looked at Rhett. You got that ledger Dutch mentioned? Mara does. Macklin turned to her. Ma'am? She went to the cabin and retrieved the ledger, handed it over. Macklin flipped through it. His expression darkened with every page. This is detailed, he said. I'm thorough. You wrote all this? Yes. He closed the ledger. I'll be honest. I didn't want to come up here. Figured this was just 2 ranchers having a pissing contest, but this... He held up the ledger. This is something else. If even half of this is true, Voss has been operating like he's above the law. He is above the law, Rhett said. He's got money and connections. He's got money, but I've got a direct order from the governor. And that trumps money. Macklin looked at his deputies. We're riding to Voss's camp, tonight. We're going to have a conversation. He won't go quietly, Dutch warned. Then he won't go quietly, but he will go. Macklin and his deputies mounted up. Before they left, Macklin looked back at Rhett. You hold tight. Don't do anything stupid. Let me handle this. And if he comes here first, then you defend yourself, but only if he comes to you. Understood? Rhett nodded. They rode off into the gathering darkness. The yard was silent after they left. Then someone let out a long breath. Did that just happen? Sykes asked. I think it did, Dutch said. Mar stood there, still holding the gun, still braced for a fight that might not come. So we wait? She asked. We wait, Rhett said. They waited through the night, kept watch, kept weapons ready, kept nerves on edge. But no attack came. And when dawn broke, a rider appeared on the ridge, one of Macklin's deputies. He rode down into the yard and dismounted. It's over, he said. What? Rhett stepped forward. Voss is under arrest. We found evidence at his camp linking him to the fire. Found the men who set it. They talked once we put pressure on them. Voss is being transported to the territorial prison. He'll stand trial. Mara felt her knees go weak. It's really over? She asked. It's really over. The yard erupted. Men cheered, slapped each other on the back. Someone fired a rifle into the air in celebration. Mara just stood there, trying to process it. They'd won. Against all odds, against all expectations, they'd won. Rhett walked over to her. You did this. I didn't. The ledger, the documentation, that's what convinced the governor to act. That's what gave Macklin the ammunition he needed. He smiled, actually smiled. You did this. She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled back. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, it felt real. The celebration didn't last long. By midday, the reality of what they'd been through started to settle in. Men walked around the ranch in a daze, exhausted from weeks of tension finally released. Some slept where they sat. Others just stared at nothing, trying to come back to themselves. The deputy who'd brought the news stayed long enough to give them the full story. Voss had been caught red-handed with stolen property from neighboring ranches. 2 of his men had turned on him when faced with prison time, confessing to everything. The fire, the cattle stampede, even plans for worse things that hadn't happened yet. Governor's taking this serious, the deputy said, making an example. Says he won't tolerate this kind of lawlessness in the territory. After he left, the ranch fell into an odd silence, like everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for Voss to somehow escape justice, waiting for the next disaster. But nothing came. Just quiet. Just peace. Mara made food. It's what she always did when she didn't know what else to do. She cooked a meal big enough to feed an army. Roasted beef that she'd been saving for a special occasion. Potatoes mashed with real butter and cream. Fresh bread, 3 loaves. Greens from the small garden she'd started behind the kitchen. And pie. 3 kinds. Apple, cherry, and a custard that took her 2 hours to get right. The men ate like they had been starving, and maybe in some ways they had been. Not for food, but for normalcy. For the simple pleasure of sitting down to a meal without wondering if it would be their last. Dutch ate 3 helpings. Porter, still moving slow from his wound but healing, ate until he had to loosen his belt. Even Sykes, who usually picked at his food, cleaned his plate twice. After the meal, Rhett stood up. He wasn't much for speeches, but something in his face said he needed to say this. I want to say something, he announced. The room went quiet. Forks stopped moving. Men turned to look. We've been through hell these past few weeks, Rhett said. His voice was steady but tired. Lost livestock. Lost sleep. Lost our peace of mind. Nearly lost a lot more than that. He paused, looking around at each face. But we made it. Because we stood together. Because we didn't break. Because when it would have been easier to run or give up or sell out, we stayed. A few men nodded. Someone murmured agreement. I know I'm not easy to work for, Rhett continued. I know I push hard. Expect a lot. Don't say thank you as often as I should. But I want you to know every one of you proved yourselves these past weeks. Showed what you're made of. And I'm grateful. He looked directly at Mara. Especially you. You came here with nothing. No one gave you a chance. Hell, most people looked at you like you didn't deserve one. But you fought harder than anyone, kept us fed when we were too tired to think, kept your head when everything was falling apart, and you saved us when it mattered most. The men turned to look at her. Mara felt heat rise to her face. She wanted to disappear into the kitchen, but Rhett wasn't done. That ledger you kept, he said. That documentation. That's what convinced the governor to act. That's what gave the sheriff the ammunition he needed to arrest Voss. Without that, we'd still be out here waiting for the next attack. I just wrote down what happened, Mara said quietly. You did more than that, Dutch interjected. You gave us a weapon when all we had were guns. You fought smart when the rest of us were ready to just fight hard. You stood when most people would have run, Sykes added. Porter raised his cup, wincing a little from the movement. To Mara. The others joined in, raising cups and glasses. To Mara. The sound of her name echoed through the room, and Mara felt something crack open inside her chest. Not pain. Something else. Something that felt dangerously close to belonging. She didn't know what to say. Didn't trust herself to speak without her voice breaking. So she just nodded and turned back toward the kitchen before anyone could see the tears starting to form. But they were good tears this time. The kind that came from finally being seen, from mattering. She stood at the kitchen sink, hands braced on the counter, and let herself shake. Behind her, the conversation resumed, men talking and laughing, the tension of the past weeks finally releasing. Tommy appeared at her elbow. He'd been helping clear dishes. "You okay, Mama?" She looked down at him and smiled. "Yeah, baby, I'm okay. They really like you." "I think maybe they do." "I like it here," he said. It was the most direct statement he'd made about their situation since they'd arrived. "Me too." He hugged her around the waist and then went back to clearing plates. Mara watched him go, this boy who'd had to grow up too fast, who'd learned to be quiet and careful and never ask for too much. He looked different now. Still serious, still watchful, but there was something lighter about him, like he could finally breathe. That evening, after everything was cleaned and put away, and the men had dispersed to their evening routines, Mara walked outside. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and orange and deep purple. The air smelled of pine and smoke and the approach of autumn. There was a crispness to it that hadn't been there a month ago. She wrapped her shawl tighter and walked toward the corral where the horses were settling for the night. Rhett was there, leaning against the fence, watching them. He had that look he got sometimes when he thought no one was watching, tired, older than his years, carrying weight that never quite left his shoulders. She walked over and stood beside him, not saying anything at first, just sharing the space. "Hell of a day," he said after a while. "Hell of a few months." He smiled at that, actually smiled. That too. They stood in silence, watching the horses mill around. One of them, a gray mare that had always been skittish, came over to the fence. Rhett reached out and stroked her nose. "I meant what I said in there," he said without looking at Mara, "about you saving us. You would have figured something out. Maybe not." He turned to face her now. "Truth is, I was ready to go down fighting. Didn't care about the cost. Didn't matter if it was smart or stupid or suicidal. All I knew was I wasn't backing down. That's called stubborn." "I know what it's called." He smiled slightly. "But you found another way, a smarter way. You took all that chaos and made sense of it, turned it into something we could use. I just kept a ledger. You gave us hope when we didn't have any. That's more than a ledger." He paused. "You gave me hope." The words hung in the air between them. Mara felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "You carry too much," she said quietly. "You always have." "Someone has to." "Not alone. Not anymore." Something shifted in his expression, something vulnerable that she'd never seen before. "You planning to stick around?" he asked. His voice was careful, like he was bracing for rejection. "I don't have anywhere else to go." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him, really looked. Saw the man beneath the hardness, beneath the stubbornness, beneath all the walls he'd built to keep the world at arm's length. "Yes," she said finally, "I'm planning to stick around." "Good." He looked back at the horses, but she could see relief in the set of his shoulders. "Because I was hoping you would." They didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. Some things didn't need words, they just needed time and proximity and the willingness to stand beside someone even when everything was hard. Mara stayed there until the sun fully set and the stars started to appear. Then she went back to the cabin where Tommy was already asleep, curled up with his book still open beside him. She closed the book, tucked him in, and sat by the small stove, watching the fire burn down to embers. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something that might have been peace. The next week brought a kind of normalcy that felt almost surreal. The threat was gone. Voss was locked up awaiting trial. His men had scattered, some arrested, others just disappearing into the mountains to avoid prosecution. The ranch could breathe again. Work continued because work always continued on a ranch. Fences still needed mending. Animals still needed feeding. Winter was coming, and there was wood to chop and hay to stack and 100 other things that couldn't wait. But it felt different now. Lighter. Men smiled more, joked more. The constant tension that had been hanging over everything like a thundercloud finally lifted. Mara fell back into her routine, but even that felt different. The men treated her with a respect that went beyond politeness or gratitude. They listened when she spoke, asked her opinion on things that had nothing to do with cooking, included her in conversations about ranch business. One morning, Dutch came to her with a problem about the winter feed stores. "We're running low on hay," he said. "Fire took more than we thought. We've got enough to get through, but not with much margin for error." What do you need? Mara asked. Need to know if we can cut back on feed anywhere without hurting the stock. You're the one who tracks everything. She pulled out her records, went through the numbers with him. They figured out that if they rotated the grazing differently and supplemented with some grain they could buy from a ranch down valley, they'd make it through. You're good at this, Dutch said when they finished. At what? Problem solving, managing. Most cooks just cook. You run the whole operation. Someone has to, he grinned. You sound like Rhett. She didn't know if that was a compliment or an insult, but she took it as the former. Tommy flourished too. He spent his days with Dutch, learning about horses and cattle and how to fix things that broke. He was still quiet, still careful, but there was a lightness to him that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, she found him in the barn, brushing one of the horses. He was humming. Actually, humming. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard him do that. You like it here, don't you? She asked. He nodded without stopping his work. It's home. The word hit her hard. Home. Such a simple word, but it carried so much weight. She'd lost her home when her husband died. Lost it again when the bank took the house. Had been homeless, in every sense that mattered, for over a year. But standing there in the barn, watching her son brush a horse while humming, she realized he was right. This was home. Yeah, she said softly. I guess it is. He looked up at her and smiled. Just a small smile, but genuine. You're happy here, Mama. I can tell. What makes you say that? You don't look scared anymore. The observation was so simple and so accurate that it took her breath away. He was right. She didn't wake up every morning wondering if this would be the day everything fell apart. Didn't spend every moment bracing for the next disaster. She was still cautious, still careful, but the constant grinding fear that had been her companion for so long had finally released its grip. You're right, she said. I am happy here. Good. He went back to brushing. Me too. But not everyone was happy about the new status quo. 2 weeks after Voss's arrest, Mara went into town for supplies. It was the first time she'd been down since the trial ended, and she was unprepared for the reception. She walked into the mercantile and immediately felt the shift in atmosphere. The usual background noise, people talking, moving around, going about their business, stopped. Everyone turned to look at her. Harlan was behind the counter, but he didn't greet her the way he usually did. His expression was cold, closed off. What can I get you? He asked. No preamble, no small talk. She handed him her list, trying to ignore the stares. He looked it over without comment, his face giving nothing away. While he gathered the items, 2 women came into the store. Mara recognized them from previous trips, wives of local ranchers, well-dressed and well-fed, and used to having opinions about everything. They saw Mara and stopped talking, just stood there, staring. Mara kept her eyes on Harlan, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. That'll be $18, Harlan said when he finished. His tone was clipped. She counted out the money, aware of everyone watching. As she did, one of the women spoke. I heard you've been living up at Calder's ranch. Mara looked at her. The woman's face was pleasant enough, but her eyes were calculating. That's right. With all those men. I work there. Is that what you call it? The woman's smile was thin, sharp as a knife. The implication was clear, and it hit Mara like a slap. She felt anger flare in her chest, hot and immediate, but she kept her voice level. I cook and manage the household, same as I've been doing for 6 months. The woman exchanged a meaningful look with her friend. Must be nice, having all those men looking after you. They don't look after me. We work together. I'm sure you do. The other woman spoke now, her voice dripping with false sympathy. It must be so hard being a widow with a child, having to find ways to survive. The subtext was deafening. Mara's hands curled into fists. She wanted to scream at them, to defend herself, to make them understand that it wasn't like that. But she'd learned long ago that explaining yourself to people who'd already made up their minds was pointless. Is that everything? She asked Harlan. He nodded stiffly and pushed the supplies across the counter. She gathered them and walked out, feeling their eyes on her back like physical weight. Behind her, she heard one of the women say, Shameful. A woman like that, alone with all those men. It's indecent. The other one replied, What do you expect? She came here with nothing, had to find some way to survive. Women like that always do. Mara kept walking, loaded the supplies onto the wagon she'd borrowed, climbed up into the seat. Her hands were shaking. She'd dealt with gossip before, had spent years as a widow being looked at sideways, being whispered about, being judged for every choice she made. But this felt different, felt more vicious. Maybe because she'd started to believe she'd finally escaped it, started to believe that here, in this place where she'd proven herself over and over, people would see her differently. But they didn't. They saw what they wanted to see, believed what they wanted to believe. And no amount of hard work or sacrifice or documentation would change that. She drove the wagon back to the ranch in silence, blinking back tears she refused to let fall. When she got back, Rhett was in the yard, working on a fence post that had split. He took one look at her face and stopped. What happened? Nothing. Mara. She climbed down from the wagon, started unloading supplies. People in town are talking, about me living here, about what that means. His jaw tightened. What are they saying? What do you think they're saying? She saw understanding dawn in his eyes, followed immediately by anger. I'll go down there. No. She set down a sack of flour harder than necessary. You going down there and defending my honor will just make it worse. It'll look like you're confirming what they already think. You shouldn't have to put up with that. I've put up with worse. She grabbed another sack. I've been dealing with gossip my whole life, dealt with it when my husband died, dealt with it when I lost the house, dealt with it when I showed up here looking like... She gestured at herself. This. There's nothing wrong with how you look. You know that's not what I mean. She stopped, took a breath. The point is, people talk. They judge. They make assumptions. And nothing I do will change that. You know it's not true, what they're saying. I know. And you know that anyone who matters knows it too. I know that too. Then the hell with the rest of them. She looked at him and felt something loosen in her chest. The hell with them. I mean it. Anyone who looks at what you've done, how hard you've worked, how you've helped this place, how you stood with us when you could have run and still thinks poorly of you isn't worth your time. That's easy to say when you're not the one being talked about. I've been talked about plenty. People have opinions about how I run this place, about my methods, about me being too stubborn or too hard or too whatever, and I stopped caring what they thought years ago. That's different. Why? Because you're a man. Because... She stopped herself, but he finished the thought. Because you're a woman, and the rules are different. I know, and it's not fair. But fair doesn't matter. What matters is that you know your worth, and that the people who matter know it too. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let his certainty wash away the sting of those women's words, but it wasn't that simple. It never was. I should get these put away, she said, picking up more supplies. Rhett watched her for a moment, then helped her carry everything inside. They didn't talk about it again that day, but the conversation and the gossip that prompted it didn't go away. Over the next few weeks, it got worse. People in town started treating her differently when she went in for supplies. Some wouldn't meet her eyes, others made pointed comments. A few were outright hostile. The worst part was that some of it came from women. Women who should have understood what it was like to be judged. To be reduced to assumptions and insinuations based on circumstances beyond your control. But they judged anyway, maybe harder than the men did. One afternoon, Mara was leaving the general store when she ran into the gray-haired woman from the boarding house, the one who'd rented her that first room when she'd arrived in Coldwater Ridge. Heard you're still up at Calder's place, the woman said. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. I am. Folks are talking. Let them. The woman tilted her head, studying her. You don't care what people think? Mara stopped and looked at her. Really looked. I used to. I used to care so much about what people thought that I made myself small, made myself invisible, apologized for existing, for taking up space, for needing things. She paused, feeling the truth of it settle in her bones. But I'm done with that, she continued. I've worked too hard and fought too hard and survived too much to let other people's opinions dictate my life. They don't know what I've been through. Don't know what it took to get here. Don't know anything except what they assume. And their assumptions say more about them than they do about me. The woman's expression flickered, something that might have been surprise or respect. Good for you, she said quietly. And then, even more quietly, I wish I'd learned that lesson 30 years ago. She walked away before Mara could respond. Mara stood there for a moment, letting the encounter settle. It wasn't much. Wasn't vindication or validation or proof that people were changing their minds. But it was something. It was one person seeing past the gossip to the truth underneath. and sometimes one person was enough. She went back to the ranch feeling slightly less burdened. The turning point came in late October. Sheriff Macklin rode up to the ranch with news, his horse kicking up dust in the yard. Men stopped working to watch him approach. Rhett met him at the main house. Mara came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Got news from the territorial capital," Macklin said after dismounting. "Voss's trial is set for next month, 3rd week of November. Governor wants you to testify." He looked at Rhett. "You and anyone else who witnessed the attacks." "We'll be there," Rhett said immediately. Macklin nodded. Then he turned to Mara. "You too, ma'am. Your ledger is the backbone of the prosecution's case. They'll want you to explain it. Walk them through what happened, day by day." Mara felt her stomach drop. "Me? Testify in court?" "Yes, ma'am. Prosecutor says your documentation is the most comprehensive evidence they've got. You logged everything. Dates, times, damages, witnesses. It's airtight. I've never done anything like that, never been in a courtroom. Doesn't matter. You documented it. That makes you the most credible witness we've got." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "You'll get an official summons in a few days, but I wanted to give you advance notice. Give you time to prepare." Mara took the paper with numb fingers. "What do I need to do?" "Just tell the truth. The prosecutor will walk you through it. He'll ask you about the ledger, about what you witnessed, about the impact on the ranch. All you have to do is answer honestly." "What if they don't believe me?" "They'll believe you, ma'am. You've got documentation. You've got corroborating witnesses. You've got physical evidence of the damage. All you're doing is tying it together." He left shortly after, promising to send more information as the trial date approached. After he rode off, Mara just stood there, holding the paper, trying to process what had just happened. Rhett walked over. "You can do this." "I don't know." "You can do this," he repeated more firmly. "You've done everything else. This is just one more thing. This is different. This is standing up in front of a judge and jury and lawyers and telling them what happened. What if I mess up? What if I say something wrong? You won't." "You don't know that." "I do." He took her shoulders, made her look at him. "You're the most careful, thorough person I know. You don't do anything halfway. You'll prepare for this the same way you prepare for everything else, completely. What if it's not enough?" "It will be, because you're enough." The words hit her somewhere deep. She'd spent so much of her life being told, directly or indirectly, that she wasn't enough, wasn't smart enough, attractive enough, capable enough. But Rhett looked at her like she was the most competent person he'd ever met. And maybe, she thought, he was right. "All right," she said. "I'll do it." "Good." Dutch appeared from the barn. "What's the verdict?" "Trial's set for November," Rhett told him. "We're all testifying. Mara's the star witness." Dutch grinned. About time someone recognized her value. "I'm not a star witness," Mara protested. "I just kept a ledger." "You documented a criminal conspiracy," Dutch corrected. "That's a lot more than just a ledger." The month leading up to the trial was tense, in a different way than the violence had been. Instead of watching for attackers, Mara was preparing testimony, going over the ledger again and again, making sure every entry was accurate, every date was right, every detail was correct. Rhett helped her practice. He'd sit across from her at the kitchen table after dinner and fire questions at her like he imagined a lawyer would. "What time did the fire start?" "Approximately 2 in the afternoon. We first noticed smoke at 2:15. "How do you know it was arson?" "We found boot prints leading to and from the hayfield. 3, possibly 4 sets. They approached from the west ridge and left the same way." "Could they have been your men's prints?" "No. Different boot pattern. Our men wear standard work boots. These were logging boots with a distinctive double heel." On and on until she could recite every entry from memory. Dutch coached her on demeanor. "Don't get emotional," he said. "I know some of this was scary, and you've got every right to feel that. But in court, emotion can look like exaggeration. Just state the facts. Let the facts speak for themselves." "What if they try to make me look bad?" "They will. Defense attorney's job is to create doubt. They'll suggest you're lying, that you fabricated evidence, that you have personal reasons to want Voss convicted. That's not true. I know it's not true. You know it's not true. But they'll suggest it anyway. All you can do is stay calm and stick to the facts." Even Sykes contributed in his quiet way. He taught her how to breathe when she got nervous. "Count to 4 breathing in. Hold for 4. Out for 4. It slows your heart rate, keeps you steady." The whole ranch rallied around her preparation. It was like they understood that her testimony wasn't just about convicting Voss, it was about validating everything they'd been through, proving that the threat had been real, the fear had been justified, the fight had been necessary. Tommy noticed the tension and tried to help in his own way. He'd fetch her water while she studied, keep extra quiet when she was practicing. One night he even tried to quiz her on dates, though he couldn't quite pronounce some of the words in the ledger. "You're going to do great, Mama," he told her. "How do you know?" "Because you always do." The simple faith in his voice almost broke her. The trial was held in the territorial capital, a 2-day ride from the ranch. Mara left Tommy with Dutch, who promised to keep him busy and safe, and rode out with Rhett and 3 other men who would also testify. Porter, now mostly healed, Sykes, and a younger hand named Miller who'd witnessed the cattle stampede. The ride gave her too much time to think, too much time to worry, too much time to imagine everything that could go wrong. But it also gave her time to see the landscape. They rode through valleys she'd never seen, past ranches and small settlements, through forests that blazed with autumn color. The territory was beautiful, wild and hard and unforgiving, but beautiful. She understood why Rhett had fought so hard to keep his piece of it. The capital was bigger than any town Mara had seen in years. Buildings made of brick and stone instead of wood, paved streets instead of dirt roads, sidewalks with actual planks instead of just mud, people everywhere. More people than she'd seen in one place since before her husband died. It made her feel small again, insignificant, but she pushed the feeling down and focused on why she was here. The courthouse was imposing, 3 stories of gray stone with tall windows and columns at the entrance that made it look like something from a different world. A better, more civilized world where things like justice actually mattered. Inside, it was all dark wood and serious faces, high ceilings, rows of benches. A judge's bench that looked like it had been carved from a single tree. Voss was already there when they arrived, sitting at a table with 2 lawyers in expensive suits. He looked smaller than he had on horseback, older, less threatening in the confines of a courtroom than he had been in the open wilderness, but his eyes were still hard when he looked at Rhett, still full of the arrogance of a man who believed the world owed him whatever he wanted. Mara felt a chill run down her spine. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecutor was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a precise way of speaking. He presented evidence methodically, land surveys showing Voss's repeated encroachment on Calder property, financial records showing Voss's mounting debts, testimony from other ranchers who'd had similar conflicts with him. Then he called witnesses. Rhett testified first, described the attacks in detail, the fire, the dead cow, the gunfight that had wounded Porter. He was calm, factual, unwavering. The defense attorney tried to shake him, suggesting he'd provoked Voss, that the conflicts were mutual, that Rhett had struck first. But Rhett held steady. "I defended my property. I didn't start this fight, but I wasn't going to let him run me off my own land." Porter testified next, showed the scar from the bullet wound, described the chaos of the cattle stampede, the gunfire, the fear. Sykes testified about the equipment shed raid, admitting they'd burned Voss's property, but framing it as desperate self-defense after weeks of attacks. The defense made hay with that, calling them criminals, vigilantes, no better than Voss himself. But the prosecutor brought it back to pattern and escalation, showed how every action Calder's men had taken was in response to aggression from Voss. Then, on the 3rd day, it was Mara's turn. She walked to the witness stand feeling like she might throw up. Her legs were shaking, her hands were cold and clammy. She'd been in this courtroom for 2 days, listening to testimony, watching the lawyers work, but none of it had prepared her for actually being up here, for having all these eyes on her. The bailiff swore her in. She placed her hand on the Bible and promised to tell the truth. Then she sat down. The prosecutor approached with a gentle smile. "State your name for the record, please." "Mara Ellington." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "And what is your relationship to Rhett Calder and the Calder Ranch?" "I'm the camp cook. I manage the household and keep records of supplies and expenditures." "And as part of that role, you kept records of the incidents involving Mr. Voss and his men?" "Yes, sir." He handed her the ledger. She recognized it immediately, the worn leather cover, the pages she'd filled with careful handwriting over months of work. "Is this the record you kept?" She opened it, saw her own words, dates and times, and descriptions of everything that had happened. "Yes. This is mine." Can you walk the court through it? Starting from the first incident. She took a breath, drew on everything Dutch and Rhett had taught her, focused on facts. And then she told the story. She told them about arriving at the ranch, about the first threats, about the boot prints near the property line that appeared weeks before the fire. She told them about the hayfield burning, read from her entries. October 3rd, fire started approximately 2:15 p.m. Wind from the west, spread rapidly through dried grass. Estimated loss, 15 acres of feed, found boot tracks, logging boots, double heel, leading from West Ridge. She told them about the dead cow, about the message written in the dirt, about the constant sense of siege that had settled over the ranch. She told them about the night the cattle stampeded, about hearing gunshots, about Porter being wounded, about men working through the night to round up scattered stock. The prosecutor guided her through each entry, asking for clarification, having her explain details. She answered everything calmly, precisely, without emotion, just the facts. Let the facts speak for themselves. When the prosecutor finished, the defense attorney stood up. He was older than the prosecutor, heavier, with the kind of confidence that came from winning more cases than he'd lost. Mrs. Ellington, he began, you came to work at the Calder Ranch under what circumstances? I needed work. Mr. Calder needed a cook. And before that, where did you come from? Mara felt her spine stiffen. I was living in Coldwater Ridge. Before that, I'd come from the valley. Alone? With my son. Your husband? Deceased. I see. And you arrived with what resources? The prosecutor stood. Objection. Mrs. Ellington's financial situation is not relevant to this case. Your Honor, I'm establishing credibility. This witness has a clear financial incentive to please Mr. Calder. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, looked at the defense attorney over her glasses. Get to your point, counselor. Mrs. Ellington, isn't it true that you were destitute when you arrived? That you had no prospects, no resources, nowhere else to go? I needed work, yes. And Mr. Calder offered you not just work, but housing for you and your child, correct? That's standard for a ranch cook. But you were particularly desperate, weren't you? Mara met his eyes. I needed work. That doesn't make me desperate. It makes me practical. A few people in the gallery chuckled. The defense attorney's expression tightened. Mrs. Ellington, how much of this alleged documentation did you create after the fact, after Mr. Calder told you what to write? None of it. You expect this court to believe you kept detailed records in real time during emergencies. Yes, because that's what I did. Why? The question caught her off guard. Why? Yes. Why would a cook keep detailed records of property damage and criminal activity? That's not part of your job description. Mara thought about it, about why she'd started the ledger in the first place. Because I knew we'd need it, she said. I knew that if this ever went to court, we'd need proof. Not just our word against his, actual documentation, so I kept track of everything. How convenient. It's not convenient, it's thorough. There's a difference. Mrs. Ellington, isn't it true that you have a personal relationship with Mr. Calder that goes beyond employer and employee? The courtroom went silent. Mara felt her face flush. We work together. That's not what I asked. The prosecutor stood again. Objection. This is harassment. Your Honor, I'm exploring potential bias. She's already been sworn in, the prosecutor shot back. Either ask relevant questions or sit down. The judge looked at the defense attorney. Move along, counselor. He tried a few more questions, but Mara could feel him losing momentum. He couldn't shake her testimony because the ledger was too detailed, too consistent, too clearly authentic. When he finally sat down, Mara felt like she'd run a marathon. You're dismissed, Mrs. Ellington, the judge said. Thank you for your testimony. Mara stood on shaking legs and walked back to her seat. Rhett caught her eye as she passed, nodded. She'd done it. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Those were the longest 4 hours of Mara's life. She sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, unable to eat, unable to sit still, unable to do anything but wait. Rhett sat beside her, silent and solid. Dutch paced. Porter dozed. Sykes whittled a piece of wood into something that might have been a horse. Finally, the bailiff emerged. Jury's back. They filed back into the courtroom. Voss and his lawyers were already seated. The jury filed in, 12 men and women with serious faces. The judge looked at the foreman. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. What say you? The foreman stood. On the charge of arson, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of destruction of property, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to intimidate, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Voss's face went white. His lawyers immediately started talking about appeals, but the judge banged her gavel. Order! The defendant will be remanded to the territorial prison pending sentencing. This court is adjourned. People surged forward. Mara felt hands on her shoulders. Dutch congratulating her. Sykes grinning. Porter pumping Rhett's hand. The prosecutor came over. Excellent testimony, Mrs. Ellington. Your ledger made this case. I just wrote down what happened. That's all we ever need. The truth. Outside the courthouse, Mara stood in the autumn sunlight and let herself breathe. They'd won. Against money and power and a man who'd thought himself above the law, they'd won. Rhett walked over, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely relaxed. You did it, he said. We did it. No, you did it. That testimony, the way you held steady even when they came at you, that's what sealed it. She shook her head. I just told the truth. That's all it takes sometimes. The truth. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Then Dutch appeared. We celebrating or what? They found a restaurant, a real restaurant with tablecloths and actual menus, and ate dinner like civilized people instead of exhausted ranch hands. The food was good, but Mara barely tasted it. She was too busy riding the wave of relief and triumph and sheer, overwhelming gratitude that it was over. They rode back to the ranch in better spirits than they'd left. It took 2 days, but they felt shorter, lighter. When they finally crested the ridge and saw the ranch below, Mara felt something settle in her chest. Home. She'd said it before, but now she meant it in a different way. This wasn't just where she lived or where she worked. This was home. Tommy ran out to meet them, Dutch right behind him. Did you win? Tommy shouted. We won, Mara called back. He whooped and ran circles around her horse. That night, the men threw another celebration. A smaller one this time, but no less heartfelt. Someone brought out a fiddle. Someone else had acquired whiskey from somewhere. There was music and dancing and laughter that echoed across the mountains. Mara danced with her son, danced with Dutch, danced with Rhett. And at some point, in the middle of all the noise and celebration, she looked around and realized something profound. She was happy. Not the fragile, temporary kind of happiness that could be taken away with one wrong word or one bad decision, but the deep, solid kind that came from knowing who you were and where you belonged. The kind that lasted. Later, after everyone had gone to bed and the ranch had settled into quiet, Rhett found her sitting on the porch of the main house. Can't sleep? He asked. Too much to think about. He sat down beside her. They looked out at the mountains, dark shapes against a star-filled sky. What happens now? She asked. Now we rebuild. Fix what got damaged, get ready for winter, same as always. Is it, though? Same as always? He looked at her. What do you mean? She took a breath, gathering courage. People in town are still talking, about me, about us, about what it means that I live here. Let them talk. It's not that simple. If I stay, the talk won't stop. It might get worse. And that reflects on you, on the ranch, on your reputation. I don't care what people say. Maybe you should. You have to do business with these people. Buy supplies, hire hands, sell cattle. Their opinion matters. Not more than you matter. The words hung between them. Mara felt her throat tighten. Rhett, I'm not good at this, he interrupted. Talking about feelings, being open. I spent most of my life learning to keep things locked down. But I'm going to try. He turned to face her fully. You came here with nothing, he said. No money, no prospects, no one giving you a chance. And in 6 months, you became the most important person on this ranch. I'm the cook. You're more than that. You're the reason this place runs smoothly. The reason the men stay. The reason we won against Voss. He paused. You're the reason I get up in the morning and think maybe this life is worth living. Mara's breath caught. I'm not asking you to marry me, he said quickly. Not yet. Not until you're ready, until you're sure. But I am asking you to stay. To build something here. With me. As partners. She looked at him. At this hard, stubborn man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. Who'd stood with her through fire and violence and courtroom battles. Who was now sitting here, awkward and earnest, offering her a future. What about the gossip? She asked. The hell with the gossip. Anyone who matters knows the truth, and anyone who doesn't matter can think whatever they want. They'll say I'm using you. Let them. They'll say you're a fool for trusting me. I've been called worse. She smiled despite herself. You're impossible. I'm stubborn. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Mara said, Yes. Yes. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll build something with you. Yes to all of it. The relief on his face was almost comical. Yeah? Yeah. He smiled. Actually smiled, wide and genuine. Good. That's good. They didn't kiss, didn't embrace, just sat there, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the mountains. Some things didn't need grand gestures. Some things just needed two people willing to stand together. The winter came hard and fast that year. Snow fell in thick blankets, turning the ranch into a white fortress. Temperatures dropped below zero. Work became a matter of survival, keeping animals fed, keeping fires burning, keeping everyone alive until spring. But they made it through, not easily, not smoothly. There were problems and setbacks and days when it felt like they were fighting a losing battle against nature itself. But they made it. And when spring finally came, bringing green grass and warm winds and the promise of new beginnings, Rhett asked Mara to marry him. Not with a ring, not with a grand speech, just, will you marry me? And she said, yes. The wedding happened in April, not a big affair, just the ranch hands, a few people from town who'd come around after the trial, and a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Mara wore a simple dress that she'd sewn herself, nothing fancy, nothing she couldn't work in afterward. Tommy stood beside her, proud and beaming, holding the simple band that would serve as her wedding ring. Rhett wore his best shirt and looked uncomfortable in it, but he showed up. That's all that mattered. The ceremony was short. The vows were simple. Do you take this woman? I do. Do you take this man? I do. And just like that, they were married. Not because Mara needed saving, not because Rhett needed a housekeeper, but because they'd chosen each other. Because they'd built something together that was worth keeping. Because after everything they'd been through, they'd earned the right to stand together officially. After the ceremony, there was food and music and dancing. The men got drunk and told embarrassing stories about both of them. Someone broke out a fiddle. The party went on until well past midnight. Mara danced with her son, danced with Dutch, danced with her husband. And at some point, in the middle of all the noise and celebration, she looked around and felt a peace so profound it almost hurt. This was her life now. These were her people. This was her home. She'd fought for it, bled for it, stood her ground when everything told her to run. And she'd won. Later, after everyone had gone to bed and the ranch had settled back into its normal rhythms, Mara stood outside and looked up at the stars. Tommy came out and stood beside her, now 8 years old and growing taller every day. You happy, Mama? Yeah, baby, I am. Me too. He paused. Are we going to stay here forever? I don't know about forever, but for as long as we want to. I want to. Then we will. He went back inside, and a moment later, Rhett joined her. He didn't say anything, just put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him and looked out at the ranch they'd fought so hard to protect, at the mountains that had tested them, at the future they were building together. And she thought about the woman she'd been when she arrived. That woman had been broken, ashamed, so desperate to survive that she would have accepted any scraps the world threw her way. That woman had apologized for existing, had made herself small, had believed all the things people said about her, that she wasn't enough, wasn't worthy, wasn't deserving of anything better than whatever she could beg or borrow. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone different, someone who'd learned to fight, to stand her ground, to demand respect instead of hoping for it. Someone who'd proven, to herself and everyone else, that strength wasn't about being perfect or fearless or even particularly brave. It was about showing up anyway, about doing the work even when it was hard, about refusing to let the world make you small. Mara had learned that lesson the hard way, through fire and violence and gossip that tried to define her, through months of backbreaking work and nights when she'd cried herself to sleep wondering if any of it would be enough. But she'd learned it, and now she stood here, married, respected, home, not because someone had rescued her, but because she'd rescued herself. The world still wasn't fair. People still judged. Gossip still circulated. There were still women in town who looked at her sideways, still men who made assumptions, still people who would never see past their own prejudices. But none of that mattered as much as it used to, because Mara had learned something more important than what others thought of her. She'd learned what she thought of herself. And that made all the difference. She'd arrived in these mountains broken and desperate, but she was leaving them whole. Not because the mountains had fixed her, mountains didn't fix people, but because she'd fixed herself. Because she'd stood when it would have been easier to fall. Because she'd fought when it would have been easier to surrender. Because she'd refused to be anything less than exactly who she was. And who she was turned out to be enough. More than enough. Mara Ellington, now Mara Calder, had come to this ranch looking for survival. She'd found something better. She'd found herself. And once you found yourself, once you really knew who you were and what you were worth, nobody could take that away. Not poverty, not violence, not gossip or judgment or the weight of other people's expectations. You carried it with you, that knowledge of your own worth, and it became armor, became strength, became home. And standing there under the stars with her son asleep inside and her husband beside her and the ranch stretching out in all directions, Mara finally understood what home really meant. It wasn't a place. It was knowing that wherever you stood, you had the right to be there. It was knowing that you'd earned your space in the world. It was knowing that you mattered. And she did matter. Finally, completely, undeniably. She mattered.